Hello everyone and welcome to DC Central, and in today's video we're going to be breaking down and doing our entire season overview for Arrow Season 7, so make sure you sit back and relax. This could be a long one and this is most certainly going to be an interesting one, so let's discuss. So Season 7 of Arrow was quite an anticipated one going into it, given the fact that obviously by the end of Season 6, Oliver Queen was arrested and sent to Slabside Maximum Security Prison, and this was setting up a very interesting story going into the 7th season. On top of that, we also had a new showrunner in the form of Beth Schwartz, who was taking over the showrunner duties from Mark Guggenheim and Wendy Mericle. So it was quite interesting that we had these new elements going into Season 7, and it made the season quite interesting going into it, and also for the majority of the season kept it pretty interesting. So I'll start off with the positives. First off, the best episodes of the season were episodes 1 to 7, which was the entire prison arc. Also episode 13, which was the Star City Slayer. That was a fantastic episode, which again kind of tied back into the prison arc. And also episode 18, Lost Canaries, which was a fantastic episode for Laurel. So we had a lot of really interesting, really cool episodes in this season. And I feel like they were, particularly when I look back on the season, they were the ones that stood out the most to me personally. Now, speaking of the prison arc, that is one of the biggest positives I can give this season, because the prison arc in this entire season was absolutely incredible. This was the absolute peak of the season, and it was just so fresh, and it was so different, and it was so dynamic to what we had seen on Arrow before. The stuff in the prison was some of the best stuff Arrow has done in its 7 years on TV, and just having Oliver in this situation where he was completely separate from all the other characters on the show, minus a couple of interactions with Felicity and Diggle, he was completely out of the picture from the main storyline. He was off by himself, facing villains that we had already met previously on the show, such as Danny Brickwell and Cody Rhodes, and also Bronze Tiger, who I'll get to later. Like, we had some really awesome moments, and also just the action in this was really cool. The way that Oliver was trapped and forced to kind of be in the situation by himself, you know, to having to be in these really dark and violent places at times. Like, it got really dark in the prison storyline, which I really enjoyed, because Arrow is supposed to be a dark and mature show, and it really felt like in the prison arc they really got down to that, and I really enjoyed that personally. So all the stuff with the prison was absolutely fantastic, and also we got to bring back Talia al Ghul as well into the story, which was really interesting. We were all wondering where she was after the season 5 finale, and we got to see that here in season 7, which was great. We got some really awesome character development with Oliver, especially with that psychiatric doctor who came in. The work he did with Oliver, they did some really good character work there, and I feel like the prison stuff overall just provided a very interesting take on Arrow, and something that was very different, and it made the show feel the most fresh it's been in a long time, and that is one of the biggest credits I can give the prison arc. And again, although I feel like the season peaked way too early, and it did peak with the first 7 episodes, which was the prison arc, it never quite managed to, you know, come back from that, but it was still really good. And also that leads me into what is, in my opinion, the best episode of the season, episode 7, the Slabside Redemption, which was essentially the season finale of the prison arc. And again, that was a brilliant episode, so well directed, so well choreographed. I give all credit in the world to James Bamford for that, the way he was able to craft that episode. You know, it was essentially a 40-minute long action sequence, and it was so well done. And again, it served as a brilliant little conclusion to what was a great little prison miniseries within Arrow. There was strong action and camera work and also choreography throughout the entire season. This is something you've come to expect with Arrow these days. Arrow has always had strong action, has always had strong camera work, and that's because of the stunt and choreography team. They've always been very good. You know, James Bamford and his team always do a great job of creating some really awesome and exciting action sequences within the show, and we got plenty of that within season 7, as always. Like, even in like some of the bad seasons of Arrow, you always get cool action, and the same goes here for season 7. Like, this was a lot of really cool action sequences, even though sometimes, you know, the context of them weren't exactly the smartest. The actual scenes themselves were definitely cool to watch. And I mentioned him earlier, but I'll mention him here again. Bronze Tiger, aka Ben Turner, is one of the standouts of this season. I feel like his particular character was so well developed and so well introduced into the season that, you know, this was a character who we had seen in the first couple of seasons, and he was a character who was cool. He was a cool villain, but he was never anything that we were too interested in. But bringing him back in the season, giving him a point of relevance that he had never had before, was certainly something I did not expect, but definitely something that paid off in the long run, because this was a character who is played by a wonderful actor like Michael Jai White, and to have him have such a prominent role in the season was great. Like, in the prison, he was such a well done character, and especially when you get to episode 7 where they essentially redeem him, like, I was so impressed with all that. And again, he was such an interesting character this season, and I always wanted to see more of him. And again, going into like the flash forward stuff, when you find out that Connor Hawke is actually his son, again, it adds this relevance to Bronze Tiger that I never would have expected. Like, if you asked me that back in like the first couple of seasons, I would have never expected that, you know, his character would have been as relevant as he is today. So again, doing all this awesome character work with someone like Ben Turner was not something I saw coming for this season, but something that definitely paid off in the long run. And the way they brought him back in the finale was great. I'm still waiting for the kind of payoff to the Diggle adoption storyline, because we do know that Diggle is going to have to adopt him is going to have to adopt Connor at some point. But still, I still thought that he was a great addition to this season, a character who I did not expect to get as much development as he did, but I am so glad he did, because it allowed Michael Jai White to stretch his acting muscles a bit more, which is never a bad thing. And the other big standout character for me this season was Laurel, aka Black Siren. She was phenomenal this season. Her redemption arc was fully complete here, and I loved seeing it. Like, we got close in Season 6, but here in Season 7 we really got to delve deep into that. We got some little moments of flashbacks with Earth 2, and we got to see a little bit more about her backstory and where she came from. She got to open up to characters like Laurel, or Dinah, sorry, and also to really give her this strong bond and strong connected friendship with a character like Felicity was something that really worked. Like, that was something that I did not think I was going to like, but it paid off big time. And it was one of those things that was actually something that, you know, you think in your head would be annoying and something that you wouldn't think you want to see, but their friendship was actually so well realized and so nuanced that it worked so well on screen. And I feel like just giving Black Siren all these different elements, I mean, even though episode 18 I was slightly worried, even though, like I say, 18 is one of the best of the season, but I was worried in that episode that they were kind of going to reverse on just completely destroy all the character development we had gotten with Laurel this season. It actually served as a great springboard to kind of get to the final point of the season, which was Laurel becoming the Black Canary again, and becoming the Black Canary that Earth 1 Laurel was. And again, all of her character stuff was great in this. She was the district attorney of Star City this season as well, which was really great. Even her kind of little connection with Emiko, I really enjoyed as well. She kind of had this little rivalry with her, which was quite fun. And again, she just had a lot of great stuff. This was definitely the best season of Laurel. This proves why, in my opinion, Earth 2 Laurel is actually better than Earth 1 Laurel. And she got a lot more fun stuff to do here, a lot more to play with, a lot more to work with, and it proves why this character is so essential going into Season 8. However, we now move over to the negatives for the season, starting off with the worst episodes, and they go to episode 10, 14, 21, and 22. I don't think there were any episodes in this season that were particularly outright bad, but there were definitely some weak ones, and if you notice that lineup there, a lot of them actually come from the end of the season and the back half of the season, because I really feel like the storyline began to suffer there, but I will get into that just now. So the crux of all of the problems of Season 7 particularly stem from the character of Emiko Queen, who was introduced in this season as the new Green Arrow, and she was an extremely problematic character throughout the entire season, especially in the back half, because this character does not line up with anything that happened in the first half of the season, and does not line up with anything that they wrote themselves up to when they got to the season finale, because this was just a really inconsistent character. And a lot of this all comes from the story, because when we first get introduced to the character of Emiko, she is palling around Star City as the new Green Arrow, protecting the Glades, working with Renee, and doing all these good things. And then we find out that she's connected to the character of Dante, who is connected to the Ninth Circle, and then it eventually all culminates where we find out that Emiko is essentially the leader of the Ninth Circle, which I never bought, and then on top of that, she ends up being the big bad of the entire season. And this was a big problem, because again, it doesn't line up. I don't understand to this point why Emiko, being the big bad of the season, ever decided to suit up as the Green Arrow in the first place and help Star City, and then just become the villain. It never lined up. It doesn't make sense. It's not a character arc because it doesn't go anywhere, and also it doesn't really end up in a redemption, because although we kind of get a redemption, it's not at the point of Laurel's character where, you know, it's had enough development over the past couple of years to really feel like they earned it. They literally did it in the last 5 seconds of her being alive. And even on top of that, I don't think they ever got to the point where Emiko was redeemable, because after she dropped a building on them all in episode 21, I don't really feel like Emiko was redeemable at that point. But they still decide to do it anyway. And again, this is a big problem. Emiko is the big problem of this season, because I was really initially excited about her introduction into the show because she's a really cool character from the comics, but they have done her character from the comics in extreme disregard, because this is not the character that we are used to. If the character of Dante was a bit more prevalent in the season and was actually able to become the big bad of the season, I would be a little bit more open to it, because I'd be like, okay, well, Emiko will swap sides, go back and forth, which is what she does in the comics. But in this, making her kill Dante in around episode 19 or 20, and then eventually taking up the mantle of becoming the main villain, it never lined up. It was one of those things that was completely inconsistent. It was so poorly written, and one of those things that you just didn't really enjoy, because it was one of the things that it just didn't work. And in your head, you're watching the episodes, you're watching the season, you're thinking she just shouldn't be the villain that she is right now, because it doesn't line up with what they've established her as previously in the season. And it was one of those things that just kind of kept coming up and was never officially kind of explained. And that is a big problem for where season 7 goes, because season 7 started out in such a strong position and ended in such a weak one, because they clearly had something change in the story midway through, similarly to what happened in The Flash in season 3. And speaking of wasted and changing things, whatever happened to the Longbow Hunters? The Longbow Hunters were set up at the end of the season 6 finale to potentially be the big bad of the season, and in this season they were completely wasted. They were completely just gone after a few episodes, and they barely got any time on screen, they barely got any development. The only cool one of the three was Silencer, and even then she got barely anything to do. Red Dart was barely on screen, Kodiak was barely there, and then eventually he did come back in like one episode later in the season. I think it was like episode 19, and then he just disappeared again. So I don't know what they were trying to do with the Longbow Hunters. I don't know where they went with that. My only kind of speculation that I've come up with is that perhaps maybe that was something that Mark and Wendy were going to do as the showrunners of season 7, but then after Beth took over, Beth didn't really know what to do with these characters, and they were never part of her plan. And I guess maybe that's why they fell by the wayside, because I don't quite understand where they were going to go with these characters, because they just kind of show up and they were working with Diaz and then they're just kind of gone. And that kind of brings me into my next point, which is this season kind of has a big villain problem, because we kind of have 3 villains in this season, and Stephen Amell did say before the season began that there wasn't a proper big bad, and in a way he's right, but in another way we have more than one, because the first few episodes, like the prison arc, the main villain is Diaz, then we get Dante and the Ninth Circle introduced, and then Emiko provides through as the villain by the end of the season. So it's a very inconsistent story, because we're still dealing with Diaz from the end of season 6, which was fine, but then again we have this whole Dante thing and the Ninth Circle being introduced, and then Emiko coming in and taking over, and again it wasn't enough time to develop that particular storyline to make it believable and to make it actually viable, because again it doesn't line up. Emiko's storyline does not line up, and it was a big issue. And again, if Dante was more prevalent as a villain, I think it would have been a lot more easier to buy, but in this particular case, given the fact we had to deal with Diaz and given the fact we had to deal with Emiko, it made the whole storyline with the villain, and also just the whole season storyline, feel very messy. And another character who I have to mention is Dinah. She was horrific this season. I mean, they ruined Dinah a bit last season with the whole Vince and Team Arrow Divide storyline, but with this year, what they did with Dinah is unforgivable. They made her so inconsistent and so contradictory onto herself that she just contradicted herself in every single episode about every single situation, whether she was talking about Emiko, whether she was talking about Laurel, whether she was talking about Roy. Like, every single thing she said contradicted her previous scene, and it made Dinah such an unlikable character. And I feel like the writers have no idea what to do with Dinah, because now they have Laurel back in the scene, who is basically becoming the Black Canary again. Dinah is kind of a wasted character, because she's there, she's the captain of the SCPD, which is fine. They could have kept her as that, but then around halfway through the season they kind of make her become the Black Canary again, even though she's lost her canary cry because she had her throat slit in episode 13. But Laurel still has hers, and Laurel has become the Black Canary again, so we don't really know kind of where they're going with that. And I feel like it would have been fine if they wanted to make Dinah kind of like the Quentin-esque character, but they're not really being consistent with that either. And again, it makes Dinah a very inconsistent, very annoying, and very unlikable character. And like I said, they already did a lot of bad character work with her in season 6, and they just further put the boot in season 7, which is a real shame, because I think Juliana Harkavy is a wonderful actress and I really like her in this role, but the writers have really done her dirty this season. Roy Harper was totally wasted in the season as well. This was a real big shame for me. Roy, I was so happy when it was announced that he was going to be a series regular this season, and he was just completely wasted once again. He only really showed up in the flash forwards, and even then he was barely in the flash forwards. He was barely relevant, which is a shame because in the first couple of episodes I really thought he was going to be like one of the main characters. It was going to be him and William, but that really wasn't the case. And then they do finally bring Roy back in episode 20 into the present day, but again, he really doesn't get enough play to actually make him a big character. And honestly, I don't know how they even call him a series regular, because he is not a regular this season. He just isn't. He doesn't have the episode count of a regular. He has the episode count of a recurring. And I feel like it's a bit of an insult to call this a series regular position, because it just is not. And it's a real shame because, again, Roy is a fan favorite character. He's one of my favorite characters for sure, and I was so ecstatic to see him return this season, but he really did not get that much to do. And even though we do get some cool moments with him, you know, in episode 20 and 21 and 22, we do get to see, you know, we find out about what happened to him with Thea and also with Nyssa and the Lazarus pits and things like that, about how he died, but we never got to see any of that. And that was a real shame, because that's a really interesting storyline and something that they could really delve into, and something that they could really kind of, you know, further explore, but they chose not to do that. And I feel like that was a weak decision on the writer's part, because we really could have got to have seen a really awesome storyline. We could have taken one of the episodes, like say episode 19, we could have maybe had that with Roy instead, rather than like a Diggle focused episode, because episode 19 I think is one of the weaker episodes of the season as well. And I feel like we could have taken that away and maybe replaced that with this Roy episode, which would have been a lot more beneficial to the story, especially with where we find Roy in the flash forwards at the beginning of the season. So I feel like Roy, again, massive waste of potential here, which was a shame given the fact we had Colton Haynes back. You know, we've been struggling to get Colton back on the show, and now that we finally have him and you waste him like that, it's a missed opportunity. I don't know if he's going to be around next season. We're going to have to wait and see for that one. It seems like by the season finale he left the show, but he might be back next season. There's been no official word, so we're going to have to wait and see on that one. And they decided to bring back the Suicide Squad in this season, and again, completely wasted, completely buried. They only really ever had 2 episodes, which was episode 11 and episode 14. 11, they were barely in it. That was the episode that David Ramsey directed. They were barely in that episode, and it was barely even a concept. And then when you get to episode 14, yes, they are fully formed, but they only really have one mission, and that's it, and then it's kind of disbanded again. So what was the point? Like, what was the point of making this big thing, saying the Suicide Squad were back in the show, or the Ghost Initiative as they were calling them, and then just to have them basically do one mission and then get immediately disbanded? Again, what was the point? Why would you do that? Like, why would you get the fans excited to the point where the Suicide Squad were returning? You know, especially when we had a really cool team with Diaz and China White and Slade's kid. We had a really cool team there, and then they just completely get rid of them immediately. Again, it's a massive waste of time. It was a waste of writing. And again, it felt like a massive waste of time. And again, I feel like, what was the point? And it's just a shame when you have such a cool concept like the Suicide Squad, and then you just throw it in the bin immediately. And it's just, again, it's one of those things from season 7 where they introduce a cool concept and just get rid of it as soon as they possibly can. And now moving on to the next major problem of the season, which was the flash forwards. These were incredibly problematic. When they first got introduced, I did think they were very cool. I thought they were very interesting, like showing the future of Star City, showing us what characters like William was like in the future, you know, showing us Roy in the future. Like when they revealed that that's what Roy's kind of mystery role was in the season, was these flash forwards, an older Roy. I thought that was so intriguing. You know, we even got to see characters like Dinah in the future. We got hints that Felicity was dead. It seemed like Oliver was dead. Diggle's not around. We got Diggle's kid. You know, we got all these, and we got Zoe. You know, we got an older Zoe who was like the new Black Canary at the time. We got to see like an older Renee. Like it was super interesting. But then the story became so convoluted, and again they kept showing more and more characters. So it was basically taking stakes away from the main show, because we know at this point now that characters like Felicity and characters like Renee and Dinah and Roy, these characters are never going to die. Nothing is ever going to happen to them, which means the writers can never put them in risky situations ever again, because the viewers and the audience are never going to feel any threat or tension for them, because we know nothing is ever going to happen to them. Because unlike something on The Flash, where The Flash will often do flash forwards, The Flash usually takes place in alternate timelines, and usually takes place in altered timelines where things can change. But this is Arrow, where they don't deal with any of those sci-fi elements. This is simply a show where we're seeing the future, and that future is fixed. That future is never going to change. So no matter what happens in the present day, we know that nothing is going to happen to those characters. You know, like we knew Dinah was going to get her throat slit this season, but we knew she was never going to die from it. And then the characters like Renee, we know is never going to die. You can put them in as dangerous situations as you want to, but we know they're never going to die. Even in the last couple episodes, they did it like 2 episodes in a row where they tried to put Roy in really in dangerous situations, but again, we knew Roy was never going to die because he's around in the flash forward, so he's not dead. So again, these flash forwards are incredibly problematic. On top of that, they made the main character of these flash forwards, Mia, who was the kid of Oliver and Felicity, played by Catherine McNamara. And I've expressed before, I don't think Catherine McNamara is a very strong actress, unfortunately. I don't think she was capable enough to carry this. And if we are getting this kind of future Star City spin-off show, which has been in the works apparently, with her in the lead, I don't think it'll survive, because I don't think Catherine McNamara was strong in this season. I don't think the character of Mia was particularly likable. I think William was a lot stronger, which is ironic given the fact I really don't like the actor who plays William in the present day, but the actor who plays him in the future I thought was fantastic. And again, having characters like Roy around were really interesting in the beginning, but characters like William and Roy, who kicked off this story, were completely sidelined so we could deal with Mia and Felicity more, and that was something that I think was a big detriment to the show and a big detriment to these flash forward storylines, because there was so much more they could have done, there was so much more they could have explored, but in the end they went with more of the fan favorite characters instead of sticking with the characters that were actually good, and I feel like that was a big missed opportunity once again. But a season can be bad and end incredibly strong, like we saw with Season 6. But Season 7, unfortunately, was the complete opposite, as we got an incredibly weak finale. The finale was so rushed, and it's so evident because all the main storyline of this season is wrapped up within the first half of the episode. You know, the Emiko redemption literally comes within the last 10 seconds of her life, and then that's all dealt with. The Ninth Circle is kind of dealt with, although it seems like they might be sticking around, but I really don't know how much time we're going to deal with them next season given the fact of what we're dealing with. So that whole storyline is completely wrapped up. Roy's gone, Curtis is gone, Laurel is gone, everybody is gone, and it's just and then you have Oliver and Felicity leave and go to their like little retirement home that we saw in episode 16 to go and give birth to Mia. And then we got the introduction of the Monitor, who came up, who of course we saw in the Elseworlds crossover to essentially set up Crisis. And it's very, very frustrating to me that this is what happened and this is what came of this season finale. And I can't quite tell if this was always the original plan or if this was because Emily Bett Rickards announced she was leaving the show and they had to kind of write around that. It's quite difficult to tell because they obviously needed a way to get Felicity off the show. And coincidentally, making Felicity pregnant this season was actually a good decision because it allowed them to do that very easily. But again, it seemed very messy that they had to wrap up pretty much all the main storylines within about 15-20 minutes of the opening episode, or the opening of the episode, and literally about halfway through everything was wrapped up, and then the second half was focused on Crisis and setting up Crisis on Infinite Earths. And it's kind of frustrating that, you know, Arrow, although this is the granddaddy of the Arrowverse, this is the original show, given the fact that Arrow is coming to its eventual conclusion next season, I don't want the next season to be so focused on Crisis and so focused on the crossover that it takes away from what makes Arrow, you know, what it is. And that's what this eventual finale kind of felt like. It kind of felt like this was completely abandoning what Arrow was and is completely going in a different direction to take us in the Crisis direction, which is fine. It's fine to set up Crisis, you know, because this is the biggest event the Arrowverse has ever faced. Every show is coming into it, but I feel like you've still got to keep the identity of the show in order to please the individual viewers, because not everybody is going to be watching all the shows. I know lots of people who only just watch Arrow, and they're very confused by this stuff. And I feel like what they should have done is, you know, you can have the Monitor show up at the end because you need to have the Monitor come up at some point because of what they established in Elseworlds, but they should have spent a lot more time just focused on having, you know, the whole storyline of the season wrap up, and then at the very end you can have the Monitor show up and have him take Oliver away and say, right, we need to go and recruit these, you know, we need to go and join me on this journey to save the multiverse, a crisis is coming, blah blah blah, and have that set up, but for the most part keep it within Arrow's length. And I feel like that was where this finale failed, by wrapping up everything in such a quick form and then going straight into Crisis. And it does worry me a little bit that season 8 is going to be so Crisis heavy that it is going to lose a little bit of its identity, which is a real shame given the fact it is going to be its final season. Overall though, season 7 is a word that I have used quite a lot in this overview, which is a missed opportunity. Season 7 was a real mixed bag because you have the first half of the season, which is so strong. The prison arc is some of the best stuff Arrow has ever done, and it was some of the best stuff we had seen. And I was championing this season. I was saying, you know, this season it could eventually be the best season of the show. You know, we even got like episode 12 as well, which I forgot to mention is one of the best episodes. Episode 12, which was the 150th episode of the show, where we got so many characters returning, like Thea, and, you know, my personal favorite, Ragman, even came back in the season. You know, and we had Roy coming back, like all these different elements, and even bringing back characters like Bronze Tiger and making him super relevant, making Laurel the best she's ever been. All these different elements. There were so many good things going for it, but then they just completely did this switcheroo around halfway through the season where they made Emiko the villain and completely went against everything they established in the first half of the season, and it made the entire story suffer. And again, it just makes everything feel rushed, it made everything feel incomplete, it made everything feel inconsistent, and again, it's a massive missed opportunity and a huge shame that we had to deal with all this, given the fact that this first half of the season and everything it's set up and its fundamentals was so incredibly strong. And it's a real shame. And it's quite disappointing because obviously Beth Schwartz, I was praising her throughout all this season for everything she's done, and I still feel like, you know, for her first season on the show, as the showrunner, obviously she's been a writer since season 1, but, you know, as her first role as showrunner, I think this was a good season overall. I think it was a decent season. It's like I say, I think there's just so many moments that were missed opportunities, and so many moments that could have been so much better if they would have taken the time to fully decide what they were going to do with the character of Emiko, because like I say, Emiko is the main crutch of the problem. And the problem with Emiko isn't even the actress. I've seen a lot of people, you know, say that the actress wasn't particularly strong. I mean, yeah, she's not the best actress in the world, but she's not even an actress, she's a stunt woman. And I think she did a good enough job for what she had to do, but like I say, the way they wrote Emiko, what they did with her overall story arc just didn't work, and that was the main problem, because everything was surrounded around that, and as soon as that failed, everything else toppled over. So thank you guys for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a like, it'll help me out a lot, and share this video with anyone and everyone you know who loves DC TV and get them to join the community. And as always guys, please subscribe for all of your latest content on Supergirl, The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, and Arrow. And with all that said guys, hope to see you again in my next video.